Hello everyone, I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am. My name's Adam, I'm 34, and I live in Boston. I work as a graphic designer for a marketing agency. Steady job, decent hours, and a life that, until recently, I thought was pretty solid. I met my wife, Jenna, about 7 years ago at a friend's wedding. She was the maid of honor, and I was one of the groomsmen. We clicked instantly. She had this sharp wit, a sense of humor that could cut through any awkward silence, and this confidence that was just magnetic. She worked as a paralegal at a law firm downtown, and she always talked about wanting to go to law school one day. We dated for 2 years before getting married. Things were good, really good for the first few years. We traveled, hosted game nights with friends, and spent lazy Sundays binge-watching shows. We even started talking about buying a house and maybe having kids in a couple of years, but about a year ago, things started to change. Jenna became distant, distracted. She'd come home late from work, claiming she had to stay late to help one of the attorneys with a case. At first, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But then it started happening more often. She'd be glued to her phone, texting constantly, and if I asked who it was, she'd brush it off like it was nothing. It wasn't just the late nights, though. She started picking fights over the smallest things, like the way I loaded the dishwasher or what show we were watching. It felt like she was looking for reasons to be mad at me. I tried to chalk it up to stress from work, maybe even the pandemic throwing things off, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I never wanted to be the suspicious husband. I trusted Jenna. But trust can only stretch so far before it starts to snap. And let me tell you, when it snapped hard. The breaking point came on a random Tuesday evening. Jenna texted me around 6 p.m., saying she'd be late again. She claimed the firm was working on a big case, and she had to stay to help prep some documents. I wanted to believe her, but there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that wouldn't let me rest. Around 8 p.m., I decided to order some takeout from our favorite Thai place. I figured if she came home hungry, at least we'd have something to share. But while I was cleaning up the kitchen afterward, I noticed something odd. Jenna's work laptop was sitting on the counter. Now, Jenna never left her laptop at home when she had to work late. It was practically glued to her side. That's when the first real alarm bell went off. I stared at that laptop for a long time, debating whether I should open it. I'm not the snooping type. I always believed that if you had to go through your partner's stuff, something was already wrong. But at that moment, I needed answers more than I needed to uphold my principles. I opened it first. I told myself I'd just check her calendar. Maybe she had a meeting scheduled that would explain why she was out so late. But then I noticed her email was still open. And that's when I saw it. A string of emails with someone named Leo. At first, I thought maybe it was a coworker, but the subject lines quickly told me otherwise. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. You looked so beautiful today. Wish I could have stayed longer. Let's take that weekend trip you mentioned. I'll pick you up after work. My heart was pounding as I clicked through the emails. It was all there: the lies, the secret meetups, the plans to sneak away together. But the worst part? Leo wasn't some high-powered attorney or mysterious stranger from her past. He was a taxi driver. She'd been meeting him after work, pretending to stay late at the office, when in reality, she was hopping into his cab and driving off to who knows where. The sheer audacity of it all floored me. Here I was, worrying about whether we were drifting apart, and she was out having the time of her life with a guy who drove her around the city. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. How long had this been going on? How could she lie to my face day after day, acting like everything was fine? When Jenna finally came home that night, I was ready. I heard the jingle of Jenna's keys at the front door around 10:30 p.m. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't want to go into this raging. I wanted answers, and I needed her to give them to me without an escape route. The betrayal was already burning a hole in my chest, but I wasn't about to let her gaslight her way out of this. She walked in, acting like it was just another late night at the office. She kicked off her shoes by the door, tossed her purse on the counter, and didn't even glance in my direction. "Hey," she called casually, like everything was normal. "Sorry I'm late. The case we're working on is a nightmare." I was sitting at the dining table, her laptop closed but still in plain view. I didn't respond right away. I just watched her, waiting to see if she'd notice. Would she see the laptop and realize I knew? Would she crack on her own? She finally looked over and froze. For the briefest moment, her eyes flicked to the laptop, and I saw it, the panic. It was quick, but it was there. She covered it up almost immediately, putting on that same indifferent expression she'd been using for months. "What's with the laptop?" she asked, her voice way too casual. I was looking for that. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. "Yeah, I figured you were. Funny thing, though, you've been working late every night, but somehow managed to leave your laptop at home." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't say anything. The tension in the room was suffocating. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out what I knew and how much damage control she needed to do. So, I continued, my voice steady, "How's Leo?" The color drained from her face, and that was all the confirmation I needed. She didn't even try to deny it at first. For a few seconds, she just stood there, staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. Then, like flipping a switch, she went on the defensive. "Are you going through my stuff now?" she snapped, her voice rising. "Seriously, Adam? That's a huge invasion of privacy." I almost laughed at how quickly she flipped the script. "Don't even try to turn this around on me, Jenna. I saw the emails. All of them. So unless last night was amazing is some new legal jargon, don't insult my intelligence." She crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "You don't understand." "Oh, I don't understand." I stood up now, my frustration boiling over. "Explain it to me, Jenna. Explain how sneaking around with some taxi driver behind my back is something I'm just not understanding." She rolled her eyes, like I was overreacting. The audacity was unbelievable. "It wasn't like that, Adam. Leo was just someone to talk to. Things haven't exactly been great between us lately, have they?" I stared at her, stunned. Was that her excuse? That we were having a rough patch? Every couple goes through ups and downs, but not every couple jumps into the nearest cab for an affair. So instead of talking to me, I shot back, "You decided to ride around the city with some random guy like you're starring in some bad romance movie?" She flinched at that, but I wasn't done. The floodgates had opened, and everything I'd been bottling up came pouring out. "I've been here, Jenna. I've been trying to make this work while you've been sneaking around, pretending like everything's fine. I've trusted you when you said you were working late. I supported you when you said you were stressed. And this is how you repay me?" She didn't have an answer for that. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her face hardening like she was the one who'd been wronged. "Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have had to," she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear. That was it. The final nail in the coffin that I felt something inside me snap, not anger this time, but clarity. I was done. There was no saving this, no fixing what she'd broken. I wasn't going to waste another second of my life trying to hold on to something that was already gone. "You know what?" I said quietly, grabbing my keys off the counter. "I'm not doing this anymore. Pack your stuff and get out. I'm done." She looked shocked, like she hadn't expected me to actually end it. But I didn't wait for a response. I walked out the door, slamming it behind me, and drove aimlessly for hours, trying to wrap my head around everything that had just happened. The betrayal was still raw, but underneath it was something else: relief. Relief that I no longer had to pretend everything was okay. Relief that I could finally start moving forward. When I finally came back home the next morning, Jenna was gone. Her things were missing from the closet, her toothbrush gone from the bathroom. The house felt emptier than I'd ever seen it, but for the first time in months, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like the beginning of something new that I knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The betrayal would sting for a while, and the trust I'd lost would take time to rebuild, especially with myself. But standing there in that empty house, I realized something important. I deserved better. The first few days after Jenna left were a blur. The silence in the house was deafening, but at the same time, it felt like a strange kind of freedom. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for her to come home late, making excuses, or wondering who she was texting. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a cold, hard truth, but at least it was the truth that I didn't tell many people at first. How do you even start that conversation? Hey, my wife cheated on me with a taxi driver. How was your weekend? But eventually, word got out. Friends started calling, some offering sympathy, others awkwardly trying to avoid the subject altogether. I appreciated the support, but honestly, I just wanted to be left alone to process everything. One evening, about a week after she left, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, pictures from trips we'd taken, holidays we'd spent together, and little moments that had once seemed so special. But now, all I could see was the lie. Every smile felt fake, every memory tainted by the knowledge of what she'd been doing behind my back. That I knew I couldn't keep living like that, wallowing in the past. So, I decided to start making changes, not just to the house, but to my life. I packed up all the photos, the mementos from our trips, and everything else that reminded me of her. I shoved them into a box and tucked it away in the attic. Out of sight, out of mind. But even with all her things gone, there were still reminders everywhere. The coffee mug she always used was still in the cabinet. The throw blanket she insisted on draping over the couch was still there. The playlist we used to listen to on lazy Sundays would randomly pop up on my phone. It was like trying to scrub a stain that just wouldn't come out. That's when I decided the house had to go. I called a realtor the next day and started the process of putting it on the market. It felt drastic, but staying in that house felt like trying to live in the middle of a crime scene. Every wall, every room held memories that I didn't want anymore. I needed a fresh start, somewhere that didn't come with the ghosts of my failed marriage. Selling the house moved quicker than I expected. Within a month, I had a buyer, and I was packing up the last of my things. It felt surreal, leaving behind the place where we'd built our life together. But as I locked the door for the final time, I realized it wasn't our life anymore, it was just mine. And I was ready to take it back. I moved into a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, but it felt like a clean slate. The first night in the new place, I sat on the floor with a cheap pizza and a six-pack, staring at the bare walls. It should have felt lonely, but it didn't. It felt like freedom. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't tied to the past. I could finally start figuring out who I was without Jenna, but just when I thought I was done with her, life had one more surprise for me. A few weeks after I settled into my new place, I got a message from an unknown number. "Hey, Adam. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my heart skipping a beat. I knew it was her. Of course, it was her. Who else would it be? After everything she'd done, she still had the nerve to reach out like we could just talk. I debated ignoring it. Part of me wanted to delete the message and move on. But another part of me, a part one didn't want to admit still existed, wanted to hear what she had to say. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was closure. Either way, I needed to face it head on. "What do you want, Jenna?" I finally replied, my fingers trembling slightly as I hit send. Her response came almost instantly. "I just need to explain." "Can we meet?" Explain? What was left to explain? I'd seen the emails, I'd confronted her, I'd watched her walk out the door without so much as an apology. But there was a part of me, stubborn, foolish, that needed to hear it from her mouth. To see if she had any regrets, any remorse. That I agreed to meet her the next day at a coffee shop downtown. Neutral territory. Somewhere public, where I wouldn't be tempted to raise my voice or lose control. I told myself it was just a conversation, nothing more. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was the final step in closing this chapter of my life. When I walked into the coffee shop the next day, I spotted her immediately. She was sitting by the window, staring into her cup like it held all the answers she'd been looking for. She looked up when she saw me, offering a tentative smile. "Hey, Adam," she said softly. That I sat down across from her, my heart pounding but my face calm. I wasn't here to make her feel better. I was here to get the closure I deserved. "You wanted to explain," I said, cutting straight to the point. "So, explain." She sighed, her eyes flicking away from mine. "I know I hurt you," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "And I'm not here to make excuses. But I wasn't happy, Adam. I felt stuck. Leo, he made me feel alive again." I stared at her, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Alive? She threw away our marriage for a thrill ride with a taxi driver, and now she wanted me to understand. "You could have talked to me," I said quietly. "You could have told me how you were feeling. But instead, you chose to cheat. You chose to lie." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know. And I'm sorry. I really am. But it was too late for apologies. Sorry didn't change what she'd done. Sorry didn't erase the months of lies, the nights I'd spent wondering where she was, the betrayal that had shattered my trust." That I stood up, grabbing my coat. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Jenna. But I'm done." And with that, I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her and our broken marriage behind, for good. Walking out of that coffee shop felt like closing the final chapter of a book I never wanted to read again. There was no cinematic moment, no dramatic scene where I yelled or she begged for forgiveness. It was just, done. And honestly, that quiet ending hit harder than any shouting match could have. But even after that meeting, the emotional fallout lingered. Betrayal doesn't just evaporate because you've said your piece. It sticks to you like a shadow, showing up in unexpected places at random times during the day, in the middle of a movie, or while scrolling through old photos on your phone. I thought seeing her and hearing her explanation would give me closure, but all it really did was confirm what I already knew. Jenna wasn't the person I thought she was, and maybe she never had been. The days that followed were strange. On the surface, everything was normal. I went to work, grabbed lunch with coworkers, hit the gym, but underneath, there was this nagging emptiness I couldn't shake. It wasn't about missing her, it was about mourning the life I thought we had, the future I thought we were building together. I started diving into work more than usual. Work was safe, predictable. It didn't lie to me or sneak around behind my back. I threw myself into projects, stayed late at the office, and tried to keep my mind busy enough that I wouldn't have time to think about what had happened. But the truth has a funny way of creeping in when you least expect it. One night, I was out with some friends at a bar downtown. It was supposed to be a casual night, drinks, laughter, anything to distract me from the mess of the past few months. But as the night wore on, and the drinks kept coming, one of my friends, Jake, finally asked the question everyone had been dancing around. "So, have you heard from Jenna since that whole thing?" The table went quiet, everyone suddenly very interested in their drinks. I took a sip of my beer, feeling the weight of the question settle over me. I hadn't planned on talking about it, but maybe it was time. "Yeah," I said finally, setting my glass down. "We met up." She tried to explain herself. "And?" Jake leaned in, his curiosity obvious. "What did she say?" I shrugged. "Same old crap. She wasn't happy, felt stuck, blah blah blah. Said Leo made her feel alive." I added air quotes, the bitterness slipping into my voice despite myself. My friend Sarah, who'd been quietly listening, chimed in. "That's such a cop-out. If she was unhappy, she should have talked to you. Not cheated." "Exactly," I said. "But I guess that was easier for her." The conversation moved on after that, but it felt good to get it off my chest. I realized I'd been carrying it alone for too long, trying to pretend like it wasn't affecting me as much as it was. But bottling it up wasn't helping. Talking about it, even just a little, felt like releasing a pressure valve. A few days later, I got another message from Jenna. This time, it wasn't some half-hearted apology or attempt to explain. It was a request. "Hey, I left a few things at the apartment. Can I come by and grab them?" I stared at the message, my mind racing. The idea of seeing her again, even briefly, made my stomach twist. But I wasn't about to let her waltz back into my life like it was no big deal. "I'll leave your stuff in a box by the door. You can pick it up when I'm not home," I replied. Short, simple, and to the point. The next day, I went through the apartment, gathering everything that belonged to her. It was amazing how much of her was still there, even after she'd left. Her favorite coffee mug, a few books she'd left on the shelf, a sweater tucked away in the back of the closet. I stuffed it all into a box, taped it shut, and left it by the door like I said I would. That evening, when I came home from work, the box was gone. Just like that, another piece of her was out of my life. But instead of feeling relief, I felt empty. Not because I missed her, but because it was another reminder of how much had changed. That weekend, I decided to get out of the apartment. I couldn't keep sitting around, stewing in my own thoughts. So, I booked a last-minute trip to New York, a city I'd always loved but hadn't visited in years. I needed a change of scenery, something to shake me out of this rut. The trip turned out to be exactly what I needed. I wandered through Central Park, visited art galleries, and ate at random hole-in-the-wall restaurants. For the first time in months, I felt like me again, not Adam, the guy whose wife cheated on him, but Adam, the guy who loved exploring new places and meeting new people. One night, while sitting in a cozy little bar in Brooklyn, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Emily. She was a photographer, visiting from Chicago, and we hit it off instantly. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't anything really, but it was nice to talk to someone who didn't know my story, who saw me as just a guy at a bar, not someone with a broken past. When I got back to Boston, I felt lighter. The trip hadn't solved everything, but it reminded me that there was a whole world out there beyond the mess Jenna left behind. Life didn't stop because she betrayed me. It kept moving, and I had to move with it. I started picking up old hobbies: photography, hiking, even cooking, which Jenna always used to tease me about because I was terrible at it. But it didn't matter if I was good or not. It felt good to do things for me, not for anyone else. One evening, a few months after our divorce was finalized, I found myself walking by the coffee shop where Jenna and I had our last conversation. I stopped for a moment, staring at the familiar window where she'd sat, trying to justify her betrayal. But instead of feeling anger or sadness, I felt nothing. It was just a place, just a memory. And it no longer had power over me. I walked away from that coffee shop with a smile on my face, realizing something important: I wasn't defined by what Jenna did to me. I was defined by how I picked up the pieces, how I rebuilt my life, and how I refused to let her betrayal hold me back. And that, my friends, is the best kind of revenge. Months had passed since Jenna walked out of my life, but the echoes of her betrayal still lingered in the background like a faint, annoying hum. It wasn't that I missed her, far from it. It was more about untangling myself from the version of reality I thought we shared. The marriage, the plans, the trust, it all felt like a story I had told myself, one that had ended in the worst possible twist. But here's the thing about moving on: it doesn't happen in a straight line. Some days, I felt invincible, like I'd conquered the worst of it. Other days, a random song or an old mutual friend's Instagram post would sucker punch me right back into the past. But slowly, the good days started to outnumber the bad. One of those good days came when my buddy Jake dragged me to a local charity event his company was sponsoring. Normally, I would have bailed with some lame excuse, but for some reason, I agreed. Maybe it was the free drinks, maybe I just needed to get out of my own head. Whatever the reason, that night turned out to be more significant than I could have anticipated. The event was packed with the usual mix of corporate types and social butterflies, but amid the crowd, I met someone who would change everything. Her name was Lena, and she wasn't like anyone I'd met before. She had this effortless confidence, a sarcastic sense of humor that rivaled mine, and a way of looking at you that made you feel like the most interesting person in the room even if you were just talking about the weather. We started chatting over drinks, swapping stories about work and life. I didn't tell her about Jenna, not right away. It felt good to just be Adam, not the guy with the cheating ex-wife. But as the night wore on, I found myself opening up more than I expected. Not in a heavy, woe is me, kind of way, but in a way that felt honest and real. Lena didn't flinch when I told her about the divorce. She didn't give me that pitying look I'd come to expect from people who knew my story. Instead, she just nodded and said, "Well, sounds like you dodged a bullet. Taxi drivers make terrible life partners." I laughed harder than I had in months. We exchanged numbers before the night ended, and from there, things moved naturally. No pressure, no expectations, just two people enjoying each other's company. We started meeting up for coffee, then dinners, then weekend hikes. It wasn't long before I realized I was genuinely excited to see her, to share parts of my life with someone new. And the best part? I wasn't thinking about Jenna anymore. Not when I was with Lena, but as with all things, the past has a sneaky way of creeping back in when you least expect it. One evening, after Lena and I had spent the day at a local art fair, we were sitting on my couch, flipping through photos on my phone. I'd forgotten that I still had old pictures of Jenna tucked away in some album I hadn't thought about in months. As I scrolled, one of those photos popped up, a picture of Jenna and me from a trip to Vermont. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. Lena glanced over, her expression unreadable. "Is that her?" I nodded, suddenly feeling a wave of embarrassment. Not because I still had the photo, but because I didn't want Jenna to cast even the smallest shadow over what I had with Lena. "I should have deleted that," I muttered, quickly swiping past it, but Lena just shrugged. "You don't have to pretend it didn't happen. It's part of your story, right?" Her words hit me harder than I expected. She was right. Jenna was part of my story, but she wasn't the whole story. What mattered was how I chose to write the next chapters. And sitting there next to Lena, I realized I was finally ready to leave the past where it belonged. A few weeks later, I did a complete digital purge. I went through my phone, my computer, even my social media, and wiped out every trace of Jenna. It wasn't about erasing her from my life, it was about reclaiming it as my own. I was done letting her mistakes define me. Around the same time, I got an unexpected email from Jenna. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. The subject line was simple: "I hope you're doing well." Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Hey Adam, no, I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry again. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize now how badly I screwed things up. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you found some happiness. Take care, Jenna." I stared at the email for a long time, wondering why she felt the need to reach out now. Did she think I was still sitting around, waiting for some grand apology to fix everything? Whatever her reasons, it didn't matter. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The closure I thought I needed from her? I'd already given it to myself. Life moved forward, and so did I. Lena and I continued to grow closer, but more importantly, I grew closer to myself. I learned to trust again, not just other people, but my own instincts. I realized that love isn't about finding someone perfect, it's about finding someone who makes you want to be better, who supports you through the highs and the lows. One evening, Lena and I were sitting on the rooftop of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She turned to me, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the skyline. "You seem different," she said softly. "Lighter." I smiled, realizing how true that was. Yeah. I guess I finally let go of the baggage I didn't even realize I was still carrying. And as we sat there, the cool night air wrapping around us, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace, because at the end of the day, Jenna's betrayal wasn't the end of my story. It was just the messy middle. The real story was about resilience, growth, and the unexpected beauty of starting over, and I was ready to keep writing. By the time fall rolled around, my life felt like it had finally settled into a new rhythm, one that wasn't dictated by the echoes of Jenna's betrayal. It was strange how something that had once consumed every waking thought could eventually fade into the background, just another chapter in a story I no longer felt trapped in. Lena and I were doing well, really well. We weren't rushing into anything, but there was this effortless flow between us that felt right. It wasn't the kind of relationship that burned hot and fast like fireworks, it was more like a steady flame that warmed everything it touched. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, but just when I thought I'd finally outrun my past, life decided to throw one more curveball my way. It was a random Saturday afternoon. Lena and I had planned to check out a local food festival, but she had to cancel last minute because of a work emergency. So, I figured I'd go solo, maybe grab some good food and enjoy the crisp fall weather. I was standing in line for a taco truck when I heard a voice behind me that made my stomach flip. "Adam?" I turned around, and there she was, Jenna. Standing there like a ghost from a life I thought I'd buried. She looked almost the same, but there was something different in her eyes. Less confidence, maybe. Or maybe it was just that I was seeing her clearly for the first time without the rose-colored glasses of our shared history. "Jenna," I said, my voice flat, emotionless. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was just indifferent. And that surprised me more than anything. She gave me a small, hesitant smile. "Wow, it's been a while." "Yeah. It has." There was an awkward pause, the kind that stretches out just long enough to make you wonder why you're still standing there. "I didn't expect to see you here," she finally said, glancing around like she was hoping to spot someone to rescue her from the tension. "It's a public event," I replied, shrugging. "Bound to happen eventually." She laughed nervously, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, the same nervous habit she always had when she felt uncomfortable. It was strange how familiar the small things still were, even when everything else about her felt like a stranger. "Listen," she started, her voice softening, "I know I reached out a while back, and you didn't respond. I get it. But I just wanted to say, I really am sorry, Adam. For everything." I nodded, my expression unreadable. "I know." She blinked, like she wasn't expecting that. "You know?" "Yeah," I said, stepping up in line as it moved forward. "I know you're sorry. But it doesn't change anything." She bit her lip, like she was searching for the right words, but I wasn't interested in giving her the space to find them. I'd already had this conversation with myself. I didn't need to rehash it with her. "I should go," I added, glancing at the line ahead. "Take care, Jenna." And just like that, I turned away, leaving her standing there in the middle of the crowd. There was no dramatic farewell, no lingering look over my shoulder. She was just another face in the sea of people, and for the first time, that's all she felt like. Later that evening, when I told Lena about the encounter, she just smiled. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes full of that gentle concern I'd grown to love. That I nodded. "Yeah. More than okay, actually." Because I realized something important that day at the festival. Running into Jenna didn't shake me. It didn't stir up old wounds or reignite old feelings. It was just another reminder of how far I'd come. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened, not just with Jenna, but with my life as a whole. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the confusion, it had all been part of a process I didn't even realize I was going through at the time. I wasn't just healing from what Jenna did. I was learning to trust myself again. To believe in my own worth, my own strength. One evening, while Lena and I were cooking dinner together in my apartment, a space that finally felt like home, she paused mid-chop and looked at me. "You've changed since we first met," she said, her voice thoughtful. I raised an eyebrow. "Changed how?" "You're lighter. Happier. Like you're finally living in the present instead of the past." I thought about that for a moment, realizing how true it was. For so long, I'd been dragging around the weight of my failed marriage, letting it shape how I saw myself and the world around me. But somewhere along the way, I'd put that weight down without even realizing it. Yeah, I said, smiling. I guess I am. As we sat down to eat, I realized that the life I'd once mourned, the life I thought Jenna had stolen from me, wasn't the life I was meant to have. The future I was building now was brighter, stronger, and more authentic than anything I'd had before. And that realization was the greatest gift of all, because at the end of the day, Jenna's betrayal wasn't just about what she did to me. It was about what I learned from it. I learned that people aren't always who they seem to be. I learned that love isn't always enough to keep a relationship together. But most importantly, I learned that I am capable of rebuilding, of thriving, and of finding happiness in places I never expected. And with Lena by my side, I knew the best chapters of my story were still waiting to be written. Life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. After everything Jenna put me through, I thought I'd be carrying that baggage around forever, like some permanent scar that would never quite fade. But standing at the edge of this new chapter in my life, I realized that the scar wasn't a mark of pain, it was a reminder of survival. A few months after running into Jenna at the food festival, things with Lena had grown deeper. It wasn't just about companionship anymore, it felt like we were building something real. Something that wasn't built on illusion or pretense, but on honesty, laughter, and mutual respect. We talked about everything, our fears, our pasts, our hopes for the future. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't afraid to open up. One evening, as we were sitting on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker like tiny stars against the dark sky, Lena turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Do you ever think about what your life would be like if things hadn't fallen apart with Jenna? Her question caught me off guard, not because it hurt, but because I hadn't really thought about it in a long time. Jenna had been such a dominant part of my life for years, but now she felt like a distant memory, a character in a story that no longer defined me. I took a moment before answering. Honestly, I think I'd still be stuck. I probably would have kept ignoring the signs, pretending everything was fine. But it wasn't. And looking back, I'm glad it happened. Lena raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a small smile. Glad your wife cheated on you? That's a new one. I chuckled, shaking my head. Not glad she cheated, but glad I found out. Glad it forced me to face the truth. Because if I hadn't, I never would have met you. I never would have figured out what I really want in life. She reached over and squeezed my hand, her eyes shining in the soft light. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just saying it to make her feel good, it was the absolute truth. Jenna's betrayal had been a painful wake-up call, but it had also been the catalyst for the best changes in my life. A few weeks later, I got an invitation to a mutual friend's wedding. The same friend whose wedding Jenna and I had met at years ago. At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go. Part of me worried it would stir up old memories, old feelings. But another part of me, the stronger part, knew it was time to face those ghosts head-on. And when the day came, Lena and I showed up together, hand in hand. The wedding was beautiful, full of laughter and love, but the moment I hadn't been able to stop thinking about arrived. During the reception. Jenna was there. She spotted me across the room, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. She was with someone new, but I could see it in her face, the recognition, the unresolved tension. For a brief moment, our eyes locked, and I wondered if she was thinking about everything we'd been through. But here's the thing, I wasn't. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anything at all. She was just a person in a crowded room, someone I used to know, but no longer someone who held any power over me. As Lena and I danced later that night, she leaned in close and whispered, "You okay?" I smiled, pulling her closer. "Yeah. I'm more than okay." And I was. Because standing there, surrounded by people celebrating love and new beginnings, I realized that's exactly what I had, a new beginning. One that wasn't tainted by betrayal or regret, but built on the lessons I'd learned and the strength I'd gained. When the night ended, and Lena and I were walking back to our car, I took a deep breath of the cool evening air and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Complete, undeniable peace that I knew life would throw more challenges my way. There would be ups and downs, heartbreaks and triumphs. But I also knew I was ready for all of it. Because I wasn't the man who had been betrayed anymore. I was the man who had survived it, grown from it, and come out stronger on the other side. As we drove home, Lena reached over and laced her fingers with mine. So, what's next for us? I glanced over at her, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. Whatever we want it to be. And that's the beauty of it all. Jenna's betrayal wasn't the end of my story. It was just the messy middle that led me to a better, brighter future. One where I was free to be myself, to love and trust again, and to build a life that was truly mine. So, if you're reading this and you're in the middle of your own messy chapter, wondering if you'll ever get past the pain, you will. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But one day, you'll wake up and realize that the thing you thought would break you only made you stronger, and that's where your real story begins.